Strange daughter. Olivia was a 6-year-old girl. People often said she had her mother's eyes. Her mother's eyes were big and brown. Olivia did not look like her father at all. Her father had blue eyes and blonde hair. That was not unusual, of course. It is common for children to look like one parent and not the other. Olivia's father, George, always thought she was a little strange, a little unusual, but he didn't know why he felt that way. He couldn't explain it. Sometimes parents have feelings about their children that are hard to understand. Because of this, George felt distant from Olivia. He loved her, but he did not know how to connect with her. It made him feel sad and worried. He often thought that maybe he was the problem. He hoped one day he could understand her better. One evening, just before bedtime, Olivia was busy making a card. Olivia loved making things. She was highly creative and always working on a new project. Before George went to bed, he always checked on Olivia to make sure she was okay. Olivia was already asleep. He noticed the card she had made on her bedside table. Feeling curious, he went into her room and picked it up. On the cover, she had written, "Goodbye, grandmother." He thought it was rather strange. He didn't think much more about it until later the next day, when he received news that his wife's mother had died. George often thought about that card, but never said anything to his wife. That was his way. He always kept things to himself. He decided it was just a coincidence, and it was best not to mention anything about it to his wife, Victoria. Several weeks passed, and George, as usual, checked on Olivia before going to bed. This night she had fallen asleep and forgotten to turn off her bedside lamp. So he quietly went into her room to turn it off. His heart stopped when he noticed on her bedside table a similar card to the last one. This time, on the cover, was a picture of a dog, and underneath it was written, "Goodbye, Teddy." Teddy was the big dog that lived next door. The next morning, George saw Teddy in the garden next door. He was fine, happily playing with a ball. But that evening, when George came home from work, his wife mentioned that Teddy had died suddenly that day. Now George was convinced that Olivia had a special gift. She could somehow know when someone or something was going to die. This made George very worried. He didn't know what to do or say. So, as usual, he kept to himself and said nothing. Now, every night, when George checked on Olivia, he was afraid he would see another card on her bedside table. About 2 months later, he did. George didn't want to read it, but his curiosity got the better of him. He crept into the room and picked up the card. It was difficult to read in the dark, but he could see that written on the card was, "Goodbye, Father." George was shocked. As he got into bed, he looked at the alarm clock on his bedside table. It was 12 a.m. The countdown had started. If he were right about Olivia, he would be dead within 24 hours. George had not prayed to God since he was a little boy, but he prayed that night. His mind was busy with thoughts of what might happen and how he might die. He considered waking his wife and talking to her about it, but he decided it was better to say nothing. That night he tossed and turned and didn't sleep a wink. The next morning he got up early and went to work. He was on edge all day, expecting something terrible to happen. He jumped at every sound and could not concentrate on his work at all. Everything seemed pointless. As each hour passed, he felt he was running out of time. When work finished, he stayed in the office. He didn't want to risk going home during rush hour. He decided to stay until midnight, if he lived that long. If he died, he would be found at his desk by someone in the morning. Probably Frank, George thought. Frank was always the first one to arrive at the office. Frank would handle things well. George thought about going home. He didn't want to die alone. He should be with his family. George thought about calling Victoria, but he didn't know what to say. He felt foolish. Finally, it was midnight, and he was still alive. He breathed a sigh of relief. He had made it. Olivia was wrong. He was wrong. It was okay to go home. He waited until 12:30, just to be on the safe side. When he got home, his wife was still up. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. "Your dinner's ruined." I had to work late, he lied, trying to sound calm. I had an awful day. Have you been crying? He asked, noticing her red eyes. Yes, I had a terrible shock today, she said, her voice trembling. My boss had a heart attack during a meeting and died. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, George said. But then he thought, maybe Olivia hadn't been wrong after all. Maybe her father did die today. Her real father. Her biological father. George had always suspected that his wife and her boss were having an affair. Olivia wasn't his daughter. He knew that now. And Olivia somehow knew that he was not her father. That's why she treated him like a stranger. George turned to his wife and said, Victoria, we need to talk about Olivia. Victoria looked up with fear and guilt in her eyes. Olivia? Why do we need to talk about Olivia at this hour? Because Olivia knew her father was going to die today, George said. I want the truth. Was your boss Olivia's father?